Smart speaker use continues to grow. The latest from our daily newsletter at podnews.net. Edison Research and NPR have released the Smart Audio Report. 62% of American adults use a voice assistant, 35% now own a smart speaker, and nearly half purchase them in part to listen to podcasts. 2/3 listen to news on their device. The Infinite Dial Canada will be unveiled on June the 30th. The research includes comparable data on podcast listening in the country. Does Spotify use playback data to help its studios spy on the competition? Hot Pod Insider quotes Bill Simmons, Spotify's global head of sports content, in the Recode Media podcast this week.
One of the reasons we want to go to Spotify was they have an incredible war chest of intelligence on the habits of people who listen to podcasts, right? So if we like a certain podcast, we can actually go and see how many people are listening to it. Who's doing well? Could we beat this? Could we have a bigger audience than this?
Congratulations to Christine Kix Mwachurura from the podcast Private Affairs, who's just been announced as the recipient of the 2022 Jesse Cox Audio Fellowship. Veritone, which owns artificial speech company Veritone Voice, has acquired another synthetic voice company called Vocal ID. A new free podcast host has launched in Germany from full-service podcast agency Podcast Booth. The company places advertising within shows and shares the revenue with the creator. A comedy podcast festival is coming to London in October. It's called Cheerful Earful, and it'll include shows from Richard Herring, We Are History, and Pappy's Flatshare. The Pocket Cast's web player has been updated. It's had a number of updates so far this year. The latest release includes a redesign of your Up Next queue and work on the Mac OS app. And podcast production company Listen won the Best Startup Agency Award at the Alpha Awards this week. And in podcast news, the Aftergrad podcast has just published its 15th and final episode of Season 1, highlighting the fear and emotion that recent graduates feel when transitioning from university into the real world. The show's hosted by Robert Kane and Victoria Gilbert. From Crooked Media, Mother Country Radicals won the prestigious Tribeca Podcast Awards, Best Audio Storytelling in Non-Fiction, following its world premiere as an audio storytelling official selection at the Tribeca Festival. We'll link to all the winners from our show notes and our newsletter today. In Podland News this week, an interview from Ken Miller from new podcast app Fathom, where he spills the beans about the secret for any new startup.
If you want a successful startup, what you have to create is hot, impossible magic. That first time you hit that button and a car came and picked you up, you're like, oh, that's hot, impossible magic.
A corrupt cabal of football executives turned the beautiful game into an international con job, according to Lords of Soccer, which is a new podcast from iHeartRadio and Inside Voices Media. The podcast looks at how corruption, racism, sexism and greed have tainted global soccer and the World Cup for decades. He's kind of a big deal. The Ron Burgundy podcast is back for a new season, and he's in front of a live studio audience this time around. And if you like learning about new podcasts in Podnews, you can now get new podcast trailers as a podcast itself. It's called New Podcast Trailers, and it's available in your favorite RSS podcast app. To subscribe, you'll need to go to podnews.net/trailers. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.